You know what, this vote today, this could be the catalyst for massive growth in this country. Okay, we need to go talk to Azar. Right, let's do it. Hello everybody, my name's Michael Dowden from Human Destiny Executive Search and Recruitment. Today we're fortunate enough to be sitting with South Africa's leading economist, Azar Jammine, and he's from Econometrics. And what we're going to be doing is looking at where the South African economy is right now and what the impact is of the vote that's literally just happened. Maybe just in terms of providing a bit of context for people globally and also within the local market, where is the South African economy right now? What's our present position?
The South African economy did very well in the first decade of the 21st centuries, and that was in large measure due to the fact that the world economy was doing well, commodity prices were strong, and the country, being a primary commodity producer, was benefiting from that. Also, in the run-up to the 2010 FIFA Football World Cup, there was a big hype and a lot of construction activity and general optimism. However, with the global financial crisis in 2008-09, the environment economically took a turn for the worse, as did the rest of the world, and it so happened to coincide with the election of Jacob Zuma as president of the country. What we saw subsequent to a bounce in worldwide economic activity and in South African economic activity in 2010 was a steady slowdown in growth from 2011 all the way through to 2015. Both internationally and in South Africa, commodity prices declined, and this weighed heavily down on the South African economy. And although some people attributed the decline in our growth to weak governance and poor government led by President Zuma, there was a recognition that global factors played an important role. However, all this seemed to be reversed in December 2015 with the firing of Nhlanhla Nene as finance minister. What that did was to spark a perception that far from being a benign passenger in the South African economy's decline, President Zuma was actively engaged in doing a lot of harm through his association with the Gupta family and attempts at capturing the assets of the government with a view to benefiting himself and those around him financially. And from the early part of 2016, what we've seen is, for the first time, a bit of a divergence between an improvement in global economic activity, a recovery in commodity prices, and on the one hand, but a further decline in business confidence and economic growth in South Africa. So for the first time, the last 18 months or so, we've been moving in the opposite direction from the rest of the world. And that has increased perceptions that Zuma has been at the heart of the decline of the economy, to the extent that many now see it as entirely his fault, whereas in fact there is a big international influence at play as well as to why we've done poorly in the last 6-7 years. But more recently, it's been seen as being almost entirely attributable to Zuma. In particular, in the first quarter of this year, there were signs of green shoots of the South African economy coming out of a drought, out of an electricity crisis. Mining production started picking up, inflation was falling. People started becoming a little more excited about the possibility of a recovery in activity. And just then, at the end of March, Zuma came in with his cabinet reshuffle. As a consequence now, one sees and one saw the reaction on yesterday's financial markets, where as soon as Baleka Mbete, the Speaker of the House, came out and stated that we were going to have a secret ballot, suddenly everyone realized that the chances of Zuma being ousted had increased, and What happened? The rand rose by more than 1%, which was an immediate and instant reflection of the fact that Zuma is associated with a poor economy, and the ousting of Zuma is seen as potentially positive for our economic future.
Okay. So Azar, the numbers have just come in. The votes happened in the House, and it looks as if Zuma is staying in power. What next? What does this mean for the country, and where are we going?
It is not clear from that voting outcome that necessarily all the members of the ANC are actually enamored with Zuma's presidency. I would say that the vote in favor of keeping him was merely an attempt by the members of the organization to ensure some sort of cohesion going ahead. You've got to remember that many of those members of parliament are dependent on being members of the ANC for a living. Many of them are relatively poor, uneducated people, and without being members of parliament, they would struggle to find a job out there in an environment of very high unemployment. And so they probably felt happier just towing the party line. However, when it comes to December, that's when the vote really counts. And we've got to see between now and December how the ANC rearranges its branches, and we would then have to assess whether the branches are still in favor of keeping. Well, Zuma will be leaving as head of the party anyway in December, according to the party constitution. But the concern is that he's keen to see his wife succeed him because of the system of patronage that is built around him, and he's feeling that his wife would sustain that system, and as a consequence he would not be found guilty of corruption, and he would be able to perpetuate the enrichment of his family and those close around him. And under such circumstances, in December, were that to be the outcome, I think that South Africa would almost certainly be downgraded further. We could see substantial capital outflows, the rand collapsing, inflation rising, interest rates having to rise, and that would damage economic activity still further. In all possibility, you could have a renewed recession as business just completely withdrew from investing in the country. On the other hand, if between now and December you have a change in your branches in such a way that they vote someone else, the most obvious alternative candidate being Cyril Ramaphosa, who has a lot of gravitas, is respected, and has a huge amount of experience as a trade union leader, as a negotiator between the ANC and the National Party at the turn of a change in the system of government in South Africa in 1994, and subsequently as a business leader. I think that could generate a huge amount of confidence that South Africa can turn the corner, and in next to no time, the investment that you thought might be that South Africa was very conducive to would start being forthcoming, and the country could experience a big boom.
Okay, so Azar, when we look at the South African economy, last year we had some good GDP numbers in the middle of the year. The last, slight growth, nothing amazing, but it was positive. The last quarter of last year, slight negative. Again, first quarter of this year, slight negative GDP growth. However, our unemployment numbers have remained relatively stable, so we're not seeing a huge loss of jobs. Infrastructure development has been occurring within this country for many, many years, and we probably have arguably the best infrastructure and base to actually launch from. Businesses are sitting with apparently somewhere around about 1.6 trillion in reserves that they can effectively invest and use for growth. But what I see in the marketplace at the moment is that the decision makers there, the executives, the board of directors are uneasy about committing to expansion plans. We've got the rand, as you're saying, it's strengthening, and I'd like to get your input in terms of where you think that's likely to go going forward. But effectively, if you're sitting with US dollars or euros, bringing that money into South Africa now, you have extremely strong buying power here. So my question is now actually the right time for businesses to be gearing up, because we know it takes time from when they start to capacitate themselves, is now actually the right time for businesses both locally and internationally to be looking at South Africa as the place to be for future growth? Or do you believe that we still need to be waiting for some other catalyst to potentially drive this?
I think businesses are indeed watching what developments currently very closely, with a view to possibly assessing that this is a tremendous time to be investing in the country. At the same time, they realize that it's not all cut and dried. We have some sword of Damocles hanging over our head at the moment. Credit rating agencies have warned us that we could be headed for further credit ratings downgrades. And given that the credit rating on South African local currency debt is now only just one notch above junk status, a further downgrade would take us down into junk, and were that to happen, then South African bonds would fall out of the World Government Bond Index, and tracker funds that try to match the asset allocation of the World Government Bond Index would be forced to sell out of South African government bonds as they fell out of the WICB, and that could see massive outflows of capital from the country, which would lead to a sharp depreciation of the rand, a sharp increase in inflation, and potentially higher interest rates and worse economic growth. So the big decision at the moment is, do we invest now, or do we wait to see what's going to happen over the next 6 months to a year before deciding to actually commit here, because it could just go the other way still, notwithstanding the fact that there is reason to believe that this could be a good time to be investing here. And given that the credit rating on South African local currency debt is now only just one notch above junk status, a further downgrade would take us down into junk, and were that to happen, then South African bonds would fall out of the World Government Bond Index, and tracker funds that try to match the asset allocation of the World Government Bond Index would be forced to sell out of South African government bonds as they fell out of the WICB, and that could see massive outflows of capital from the country, which would lead to a sharp depreciation of the rand, a sharp increase in inflation, and potentially higher interest rates and worse economic growth. So the big decision at the moment is, do we invest now, or do we wait to see what's going to happen over the next 6 months to a year before deciding to actually commit here, because it could just go the other way still, notwithstanding the fact that there is reason to believe that this could be a good time to be investing here.
So Azar, it's definitely very interesting times that we're in right now. I thank you so much for your time and your insight, and look forward to speaking to you again soon.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. I'm Michael Dowden from Human Destiny, Executive Search and Recruitment, with Azar Jammine from Econometrics. Thank you for watching.